we have been spending some time talking about the principle of proportion. That is a very unique principle that we will be discussing this semester. So we talked about Klaus Oldenburg, Chuck Close, Luis Borges, and Ron Mueck, and how they use proportion to create unique artworks by scaling things super, super big. But proportion also talks about making things super, super small, or having one part of something. So like having something out of proportion, like if my eyeball on my left side was ginormous compared to the other one, or if I had one big ear, or my mouth was huge. Okay, if something was out of proportion. Okay, it makes things kind of stick out sometimes. All right, so proportion describes the size, location, or amount of one element in relationship to another, okay? So it doesn't necessarily always have to be size. It can refer to having a lot more red versus over here, okay? The proportion of color or the proportion of texture, okay? So there can be a lot more to proportion than just referring to size, but it's a really fun example when we talk about size. Anyways, so in my examples that I have down here, I got an image of like Ant-Man when he's super, super big in his giant mode. Okay, so Ant-Man is larger in life in his giant mode. You can tell that he is large in life because you can compare his head to the size of the people that are here. So he looks a lot bigger. Then I have my example over here. We have this huge Starburst candy compared to this tiny man on this diving board. Okay, so mine deal with size once again when we talk about proportion. Now, our exercise is a little bit different for this because it's preparing us for our assignment that we're going to be doing. And it talks about something called the grid method. Okay, the grid method is a tool that artists use to help them with proportions when they're drawing or painting. Now, this is a skill that's actually really handy to have, especially if you struggle with drawing things from a photograph or from real life, and it's hard for you to get things to be the right size. So maybe you make the person's body a little bit too big or too small for their head, and this can be really helpful with that. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So this video is going to be just a little bit longer, but please bear with me and even just draw with me because that can actually be really helpful for you guys. So the first thing that it asks you to do is to label both grids and use this tool and enlarging the image on the right here, on the grid below. So this is the grid below. So when we label our image, we actually use letters and numbers. So I'm going to use letters across the top. Now, when we use our letters and numbers, if you've ever played Battleship before, this is kind of the same deal going on. When I talk about Battleship, it is basically we have a labeling method for our grid, and that helps us to be able to identify the location of where we are working in. Okay, so if I was to point to this square right here, okay, what is the name of this square? Well, the name of this square is 2C. So if I look down at my grid down here, okay, I go 2C, and that means that whatever lines are inside this square, 2C, I make sure I draw those same lines here. So if I look at those lines here, I want to recreate those same lines. Keep in mind, my box that I'm drawing in right now is bigger than the box that I have up here. This is a much smaller box. Okay, so I'm going to teach you another trick to help you with making sure the size of things are right. Okay, see how the lines that I made in here are very similar to the lines that are inside this box. Okay, so here are some of my tricks. Trick number one, okay, if there are boxes that you don't need anything, cross those out. Okay, nothing's needed in these boxes. This one, okay, this one. So I'm going to be very lightly in my finished drawing, crossing them out so that I don't accidentally draw something where I don't need anything. Okay, that's tip number one. Okay, now the next thing that I want to do is to make sure that when I am working, that I'm double checking the boxes that are in here. Am working in, okay? That's why it says tip right here. Take your time and double check your measurements and which squares you're working in. So if I'm working in this square right here, I want to make sure that I am working in this square up here, C1. Because if I'm accidentally drawing B1 stuff, well, then it's going to be really weird. His ear's going to be in the wrong spot, okay? The other thing that I find really handy is if I'm in some place that's really complicated, okay? or even in general, if I find this challenging, I can break up my square. I'm going to break this into 4 smaller squares. Okay, so that means I can do the same thing up here. I'm going to break this into 4 smaller squares. Notice I can see now that this line, this diagonal line in this box, does not cross the halfway mark. So I can see, looks like this is going to go about like right here. And then I can erase my lines I no longer need. And then I can be a little bit more sure that I have my line in my correct spot because I use this to help me figure out that I don't need anything in that half of the box. Okay. And then I can go from box to box and double check where all of my lines are going to go. Okay, and I can connect this one here. I can add this one right here. Okay, so I can keep going from box to box to box, and as I keep going, I can cross off boxes as I finish them. And when I finish going through this whole thing, I will find that I will have a finished drawing. Okay, so if you have any questions as you go throughout this entire grid, make sure you let me know. This can be kind of challenging the first time going through it, but this, once you get through this process and kind of understand how this grid method works, it's actually really nice to learn how to do. The big thing is just making sure that you are working in the correct square. To break down your square if you need to, okay? And also to take your time and to draw lightly, because if you make a mistake, it's a lot easier to erase mistakes if you draw nice and light. So I hope this video was helpful for you guys. If you have any other questions, be sure to seek me out. I'm more than happy to give you a hand.